They ask when I first knew the dam was a mistake. I tell them it wasn't a day, not a headline, not even the night the soldiers took the radios. It was the moment the river fell silent behind concrete, and I felt taller than the water. Pride sounds like progress when you speak it aloud. On paper it looks like a blueprint. In the body it beats like a small, stubborn drum. I am Antoine Lefèvre, engineer, son of a school teacher and a pharmacist, graduate of Lyon, worshipper of numbers. I came to Côte d'Ivoire to build a wall that would catch a river and turn it into light. I told myself it would be light for villages, for markets, for hospitals. I told myself it would be light for the future. Mostly, it was light with my name under it. The reporter sits across from me in a warm room that smells of dust and citrus oil. She records everything, watches my hands. She calls this an after-action interview. I call it a weather report from inside a man. Sunny spells, then storms, floods where there should have been fields. She asks for the simple version. There isn't one. We broke ground in the dry season. The ground was clay and the sky a lid of hot tin. Trucks brought cement like caravans bringing faith. I learned the names of the men who slept in the workers' camp and the names of their children. And then I learned the price of cement when a border closes. Those were the first adjustments. A longer road through a friendly district. A handshake that looked like a contract and felt like a debt. Everyone said it was normal. Everyone said the river doesn't care about politics. Everyone was wrong. When the coup came, it arrived without sirens. The phone stopped, the bank paused, the roadblocks multiplied like weeds. We had power in our own lines, generated from the temporary turbines. But power is not safety. The payroll froze. The medical shipments never reached the clinic we had promised to sponsor. The workers looked at me as if my degree could clear a checkpoint. I told them it would be fine. They nodded as if belief were a currency. I spent it freely. There are facts I can list if that helps. 1,000 workers on site, 200 families in the camp, a 3-kilometer access road with 6 armed barriers by week's end, a procurement officer who didn't come back from Abidjan. The first time I paid a militia to escort a convoy, I called it continuity. The second time, I called it protection. By the third, I didn't give it a name. Language is a bridge you burn without noticing. The reporter asks, quietly, whose idea it was to evacuate the foreign staff first. I say it was policy. She says policy has a voice. I hear my voice. It sounds like a man speaking through a closed door. Logistics, I said. Insurance, I said. We'll bring everyone out when the road clears, I said. The road never cleared. The river behind the dam rose a little. The river below fell a little. In the night, the generator hummed like a lullaby for the guilty. I don't claim I didn't care. Caring was easy. Caring was cheap. I cared enough to stay on site when the last helicopter lifted off with consultants who had arrived late and left early. I cared enough to eat in the canteen and not at the prefab house reserved for management. I cared enough to walk the line at midnight, counting hard hats under the bare bulbs, whispering names to myself so I would not forget them. I cared enough to be the last man to write checks that would not clear. But I also cared about my project, which is to say, I cared about myself. The dam was my cathedral. I prayed to it in the language of tolerances and tensile strength. When a foreman begged for more diesel for the village clinic's generator, I docked it from the night shift pumps and called it optimization. When I learned a subcontractor was skimming food rations, I replaced him with a cousin of a colonel and called it reform. That's the word you use when you swap one sin for another. There were small betrayals, and then there was the big one. A truck of maize meant for the camp got rerouted to an army post. The receipt came back stamped and smiling. I signed it because I had learned to sign what kept the road open. That night, a welder's child spiked a fever. By morning, the clinic was dark and the medicine spoiled. I told myself the two events were unrelated. Correlation is not causation, we teach our interns. But there is a kind of arithmetic that lives outside math. You know it by the weight in your mouth. We kept building. The river receded into the reservoir, brown water laying down a new horizon like a warning. The turbines waited in crates, the anchors set in the bedrock. Progress had its photograph taken from a helicopter I refused to board. I gave a speech to the remaining crew about resilience. The word tasted like dust. When I finished, they clapped. It was the sound of polite hunger. You want the confession? Here it is. I chose the work over the workers. And then I lied about the difference. I told myself if we reached commissioning, the power would justify the pain. I told myself if we kept the schedule, I could pay everyone back. I told myself time was an ally. In a coup, time is a knife. The reporter leans in. She asks, "What would you do differently?" I say, "Everything is the wrong answer, and the only honest one." I would begin by listening to the river, not to the applause in my head. I would begin by learning that safety is not a line item. I would begin smaller, and with less of me inside it. Outside, the afternoon lowers itself over the city. A motorbike passes, then another. The recorder's red light holds steady. I think of the workers' camp under that heavy sky. The chalk marks I drew on a wall to count days between deliveries. The way the chalk dust wouldn't wash off. I think of a single door I walked through and didn't lock because I planned to come back. The door is still there in my mind. It opens onto water. This is not the end of the story. It is the hinge. In the beginning, it wasn't about saving the world. It was about being seen doing it. The letters from Paris spoke of opportunity, of legacy. Ivory Coast needs minds like yours, Antoine, the project director had said, his voice slick with certainty. The government's desperate for a visionary, someone who can make concrete sing concrete. I'd always loved the word. It meant real, solid, permanent. Everything my father's tiny classroom in Lyon was not. When I looked at the model of the dam in the ministry's glass conference room, I saw more than engineering. I saw immortality. That was the first temptation, to build heaven by hand. The journey south was a fever of motion. Contracts, meetings, approvals stamped in haste. The Ivory Coast shimmered through the airplane window, a mosaic of rivers and forest. Untapped potential, the investors called it. Pure chaos, muttered one of the junior engineers beside me. I preferred the first description. Chaos could be managed. Potential could be owned. When I arrived in Abidjan, the air hit me like steam. The city smelled of diesel and cocoa husks, ambition and dust. Banners welcomed the French consortium. Children waved at the convoy. I remember thinking, they're waving at me. At night, from the hotel balcony, the lagoon glowed with distant fires. I wrote home to my mother, telling her I was helping Africa rise. I didn't tell her I had never felt taller. At the project site, a few hundred kilometers inland, the river moved like a living muscle. It was unpredictable, carving new paths after each storm. "We'll tame it," I said in one of my early briefings, loud enough for the interpreters to echo it in Baoulé and French alike. "We will make this river serve the people." The workers cheered. I mistook their hope for faith. I should have listened to the old man by the bank, a fisherman who watched us unload our machines. He said, The river gives when it chooses, not when it's told. I smiled politely, nodded, and drew lines on my map. Every blueprint begins with arrogance disguised as purpose. Weeks turned to months. Contracts multiplied. The money flowed faster than the water. There was a French cafe in the provincial capital, air-conditioned, absurdly clean. That's where I met Solange, the corporate liaison from Paris. She wore linen, spoke 4 languages, and had the kind of confidence that made you forget she was younger than you. She was the second temptation, admiration disguised as understanding. "You're not just building a dam, Antoine," she said, stirring her espresso. "You're rewriting history. You're the man who'll bring power to 500,000 people." I laughed. "That's overstating it." "No," she said, smiling. "That's branding it." We began to work late. Then we stopped working altogether. In the humid nights of the plateau, between the hum of generators and the sound of crickets, she'd tell me stories about Paris, the cafes, the politics, the way success was measured by the size of your project and the sharpness of your suit. I believed her. I wanted to belong to that world again, even from the middle of Africa. Every touch felt like approval, every kiss a signature. But the dream needed feeding. Cement was delayed. Steel was stolen. Budgets ballooned. I found myself approving expedite fees, security costs, local cooperation incentives, words that sounded harmless but smelled of rot. The site accountant, a quiet man named Kouame, came to me one evening with papers trembling in his hand. "Sir, there are discrepancies in the material invoices." I skimmed them, too tired to care. "Handle it discreetly," I said. He looked at me long, disappointed, then left. 3 days later, he was gone. "Transferred," they said. I didn't ask to where. The French ambassador visited during the foundation pour. Cameras everywhere, children holding flags, women singing, men sweating under borrowed helmets. Solange stood beside me, her smile rehearsed. When the ribbon was cut, she whispered, "History remembers the man in the middle of the photo." That night, the workers drank cheap gin and danced. I joined them briefly. Then I returned to the office trailer, where the fan turned slowly above my desk, and stared at the map of the reservoir zone. Whole villages were marked for relocation. I signed the approval forms. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself they'd be compensated. Temptation rarely announces itself as evil. It comes dressed as efficiency, progress, necessity. When the first rains came, the camp turned into a sea of mud. Trucks got stuck, tempers rose. The government delayed payments. My messages to Paris went unanswered. And still, I kept going. Pride has its own gravity. Once you start orbiting it, escape feels like betrayal. Solange left after the second quarter inspection, taking with her a briefcase of reports and a photograph of us by the river. I never saw her again. After she left, I worked longer hours. I stopped sleeping. I started drinking with the foreman, calling it team morale. I convinced myself I was one of them, though my salary could have fed their families for a year. Every morning, I stood on the half-built spillway, staring at the sun rising over the water. It was beautiful. It was also dying. The fish gone, the smell of algae spreading like sickness. Still, I said to myself, progress has a price. That was the lie that built the dam higher. When the first rumors of unrest reached us, soldiers moving north, radio frequencies going silent, I barely looked up from the blueprints. I had deadlines. The men with guns, I thought, had nothing to do with me. I built walls. They built fear. But walls don't keep out revolutions. They only echo them. And the echo was getting closer. I thought I was building something eternal. But eternity has a terrible cost. It demands worship. The higher I built, the smaller I became. The money came easy after the coup, at least easier than honesty. When the ministries fell silent, men with rifles began to speak on their behalf. Every transaction became a prayer for survival. Every handshake came with a whisper: protection fee, transport clearance, emergency levy. I paid, and the dam kept moving. Progress bought in cash and fear. The expatriates who stayed called me brave. The locals who stayed called me desperate. The truth was simpler. I was addicted, not to liquor or lust, though both had their moments, but to control. Control is a drug that doesn't taste like sin until you're too deep to spit it out. Nights stretched long. Liquor, music, hands. The provincial capital never slept. While the villages starved, the city pulsed under blackout generators, half-lit bars serving whiskey priced in American dollars. I told myself I went there to negotiate, to maintain morale. But really, I went there to forget how much silence weighed. There was a bar near the river called Le Mirage, where the floorboards shuddered with bass and the walls sweated like the people inside them. Every face shone with hunger, for money, for meaning, for an exit. They called me Monsieur Le Barrage, Mr. Dam. It was meant as respect. It sounded like mockery. That's where I met Awa. She was the bartender, young, sharp, not afraid to laugh in my face. She said I looked like a man trying to buy forgiveness by the bottle. I said I was trying to buy quiet. She said it costs more. She was right. I told myself she was different, that talking to her was human, not indulgent. But each night blurred into the next. The same songs, the same smoke, her voice cutting through the static. She spoke about her brother, who had once worked at the construction site, then disappeared after the soldiers came. I said I hadn't heard. She looked at me the way people look at rain, knowing it falls where it wants, not where it's needed. Still, she kept pouring my drink. Still, I kept returning. Every touch made forgetting easier. Every laugh buried one more memory. The dam was ahead of schedule but behind on ethics. Concrete poured like liquid sin, smooth, gray, untraceable. The turbines arrived under armed escort, paid for by invoices I didn't dare open. My deputy, a man named Lebrun, warned me. These costs are illegal. I told him, so is failure. He quit 2 days later. His replacement brought whiskey instead of questions. One night, after too much gin, I found myself in Awa's small apartment behind the bar. The city hummed outside, the river far below like a sleeping animal. On her wall hung a calendar from a missionary school. On the back of her door, a red scarf. "You don't belong here," she said. "I built here," I replied. She laughed, slow and tired. "You built a cage and called it heaven." Her words hit harder than the liquor. I kissed her anyway, maybe to prove her wrong, maybe because she was right. When I returned to the site the next morning, the workers had gathered by the fence. A man had drowned. A welder swept away when a gate opened too soon. No one knew who gave the signal. The engineers blamed the power cut. The soldiers blamed the engineers. I blamed the river because I couldn't blame myself. But the truth followed me like humidity. That day, I signed another security payment. Another silence. Awa didn't come to the bar that night. Or the next. Rumor said she left town after soldiers raided her neighborhood. Rumor said her brother's body had been found near the riverbank. I stopped going to Le Mirage, but its music stayed in my head, that pounding rhythm of denial. The same face, the same glass, the same lie. That's how every evening felt. I was a man drinking with ghosts, pretending they were colleagues. I called it diplomacy. I called it leadership. The truth was, I couldn't stand the sound of my own name. I'd built a monument to human progress and filled it with human absence. I thought pleasure meant freedom. It only meant silence. Desire makes every sin sound like a choice. The dam's walls rose higher, and so did my isolation. The workers stopped meeting my eyes. The generator's hum turned into a heartbeat of guilt. Every meter of concrete sealed away another promise I'd broken. And still, I kept building, because stopping would have meant admitting the river was right. The same bar, the same face, the same lie. But by then, even the lie had lost its echo. The dam was finished, at least on paper. The inauguration date was postponed indefinitely, which meant no one was coming. The war lines shifted weekly. The embassy staff had already left. Paris had gone silent. I was still there, guarding a monument to ambition that no one needed anymore. The workers had thinned out. Some fled north. Others simply stopped showing up. The company truck sat rusting by the gate. The air smelled of rain and rusted metal. The hum of the turbines never began. We never got to turn them on. But I stayed, because what else was there to do? At night, I could hear the river pressing against the dam, soft at first, then heavy, like breathing. It wanted release. I understood the feeling. I drank to sleep. I woke to noise. I worked for no one. The soldiers guarding the site had started stealing copper. I didn't stop them. I didn't stop anyone anymore. Then, one morning, I found the camp empty. No laughter, no children, no smoke from cooking fires, just footprints and silence. Kwame's old ledger still lay on the table, the one he'd used to track expenses. Between the lines of numbers, he had written in neat French, "When the river stops moving, men must." I closed the book. I didn't open it again. The dam began to crack, not in the concrete, but in the idea. The politicians who once praised it now blamed it for economic instability. A local militia seized control of the lower reservoir, demanding a ransom to protect the infrastructure. I paid what I could from the remaining budget. Then one night the power failed. The pumps stopped. The emergency alarms died mid-tone. And with them, something inside me went quiet too. The lights went off, but not inside me. The next morning, I found one of the guards dead by the gate, shot, probably over fuel. I buried him by the spillway. There was no priest, just the sound of the wind scraping the metal railings. After that, I stopped keeping time. Days became indistinguishable from nights. The sun rose and set on autopilot, indifferent. My clothes reeked of dust and sweat. I stopped shaving. I talked to the dam as if it could hear me. "Are you happy now?" I'd ask. The wind never answered, but the water below seemed to move slower, heavier, like it was listening. One afternoon, I drove to the nearest village, 10 kilometers away. It was empty too. Roofs collapsed, market stalls overturned. Chickens pecked at silence. I left a sack of rice at a doorstep, out of habit. No one came to take it. I sat by the dry well and stared at my reflection in the dark water. The face that stared back wasn't the man who had arrived from France with pressed shirts and blueprints. This one had hollow eyes and cracked lips. A ghost wearing ambition's last uniform. I whispered, "You built heaven." The reflection smiled, thin and cruel. "You built a prison." When the rains came again, they came angry. The valley swelled. The dam trembled under the weight of what it was holding. I thought about opening the gates, letting the water free, but I didn't know if that would save anyone or drown them. So I waited. Waiting became my only purpose. Then one night, I woke to a sound like thunder breaking bone. One of the spillway gates had jammed. Water surged over the top, tearing through scaffolding. I ran into the storm, shouting orders to men who weren't there. My voice vanished into the roar. By dawn, the flood had settled. Not catastrophic, but enough to drown the camp. The workers' huts were gone. The road disappeared under brown waves. I stood on the dam crest, soaked and shaking, staring at what I'd built. The thing I had worshipped had finally come alive, and it didn't need me.
The soldiers fled the next morning. I stayed 2 days longer, scribbling useless maintenance notes into a soaked ledger. Then I locked the control room door, pocketed the key, and started walking down the mountain road. I didn't look back, not once. But even as I walked, I could feel it. The river behind me, breathing through concrete, patient, endless. It would wait long after my name was forgotten. By the time I reached the city, I was another refugee. My clothes stained, my papers water-damaged, my accent too polished to blend in. I found a church basement with cots and strangers. I slept there for 3 nights. No one asked who I was. No one cared. The dam was already being looted by the time the government retook the region. They said it was structurally stable but politically contaminated. So they left it to rot, a monument to foreign ambition. And to me. I had dreamed of building heaven. Instead, I'd engineered exile. I kept paying for the night, until the night asked for me. The sound of collapse isn't thunder. It's silence that doesn't end. The cell smelled of sweat and dust, but mostly of time. They called it temporary detention. I called it payment. I had been found days later at a checkpoint, a foreigner without documents, without explanation, carrying a dam key in his pocket like a relic. They took me for a spy, a looter, a ghost of someone richer. In war, identity is a coin that changes hands too fast. So I sat there in a concrete room under a single bulb that flickered like a heartbeat running out of patience. There were 6 of us inside, a preacher, a thief, a boy who didn't know why he was there, and me, the man who tried to build heaven and ended up underground. No one asked my name. Names meant nothing. We were all just waiting for someone to remember we existed. The first nights were loud. The guards shouted, the prisoners cursed, the generator coughed. Then came the quiet, the kind that doesn't arrive suddenly, but grows cell by cell until even breathing feels intrusive. I found a rhythm in counting drops of water falling from a pipe. That's how I measured time. At first, I replayed the project in my head like a movie. Each excavation, each concrete pour, every triumph I could still claim as mine. Then the reel changed. Faces began to appear. The workers, the children, Awa behind the bar, the old fishermen by the riverbank. Their eyes didn't accuse me.
They just asked the question I'd avoided my whole life. Why? The preacher in the corner hummed each night, a low tune, no words. One evening I asked him what song it was. He said, "It's not a song, it's a memory." "A memory of what?" "Of home," he said, smiling faintly. "It's the only thing they can't confiscate." That night I tried to remember my own. Not the speeches or the contracts, but my mother's kitchen in Lyon, steam rising from the pot, her voice saying, "Eat while it's hot, Antoine. Cold food makes a cold heart." I'd forgotten how soft her hands looked when she reached for the ladle. I'd forgotten that warmth doesn't need applause. And for the first time since the dam, I didn't cry. I listened. The memory of home is the loudest sermon. After a week, one of the guards, a young man, maybe 20, began to talk to me. He said he'd once worked construction before the war. When I told him I was an engineer, he laughed. "You people think cement can fix everything," he said. I didn't argue. He brought me extra water once, maybe out of pity, maybe curiosity. "Why did you stay?" he asked. "All the others left." I thought about it for a long time. Then I said, "Because I thought leaving would make me small." He looked at me for a while, then nodded. "Now you are small," he said softly. "But maybe that's good." One evening, the preacher's tune changed. He hummed a hymn I didn't know, slow, rising, gentle. The others joined, humming through cracked lips. I closed my eyes and listened. And there, in that stifling dark, something shifted. For months I had measured worth in concrete, in megawatts, in kilometers of pipe. But here, the only unit of progress was breath, shared and steady. The boy beside me whispered, "You pray like a foreigner." I asked, "How does a foreigner pray?" He said, "With eyes open." He was right. I wasn't praying. I was finally seeing. A few days later, soldiers came. They released some, kept others. I was one of the lucky ones. If luck is the word for it. A relief team had confirmed my identity. I was free to go. Before I left, the preacher pressed something into my palm. A small stone, smooth and warm. "For the river," he said, "when you find it again." I didn't ask what he meant. I just nodded. When the gate opened, sunlight spilled into the cell. It was harsh, almost violent, after so long in the dark. My eyes watered. I laughed, a strange, cracked sound. The world smelled of rain and soil. I walked out with nothing but the stone and the damn key. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't go back. The truck that carried me to the city passed through villages still rebuilding. Children waved again, just like the day I'd arrived years before. But this time, I didn't mistake their joy for mine. They were waving at life, not at me. That night, I reached the coast. The sea was black, the horizon erased by storm. I threw the key into the waves, then the stone. The sound was small, but final. And in that silence, not absence, but peace, I felt the weight lift. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of it. I built a wall to hold back water, but I was the one drowning. In the quiet, I learned that humility doesn't rebuild. The reporters stopped calling after a while. The headlines faded. "French engineer survives Ivorian coup." Printed once, then buried under newer disasters. I never corrected them. They called it survival. I knew it was something smaller and truer. I went back to France, but not to Lyon. Too many ghosts in that air. Instead, I found a modest apartment in Marseille, near the port. The sea there isn't blue like in postcards. It's gray, honest, familiar. I like that. It doesn't pretend to be heaven.
I started teaching part-time, civil engineering, basic hydraulics.
The students call me Monsieur Antoine, not Engineer Lefèvre. Titles don't mean much now. I tell them about tolerance ratios and structural integrity, but sometimes I stop mid-sentence and add, the hardest part to calculate is the weight of human error. They always laugh, thinking it's a joke. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. Every morning, I walk along the docks. The sound of cranes and gulls, the salt air. Some days I buy bread and coffee for the migrants waiting by the fence, men from Ghana, Côte d'Ivoire, Sierra Leone. They remind me of my workers, the same quiet eyes, the same hunger that has nothing to do with food. One of them, a young man named Yao, recognized my accent one day. "You were there," he said, "at the river." I nodded. He didn't ask more, and I didn't offer. Sometimes mercy means leaving stories unfinished. The key is gone, but the stone, the one the preacher gave me, I kept another like it from the shore that night. It sits on my desk beside a cracked photo of the dam under construction. When the students ask what it is, I say, a reminder that nothing stays still. Not rivers, not men. They don't understand yet. They will. At night, I still hear the hum, that low vibration of turbines that never turned. In my dreams, I walk along the crest again. The air is heavy, but not threatening. Awa's voice echoes faintly through the mist. Sometimes she's laughing. Sometimes she's singing something I can't quite remember. When I wake, I lie still, listening to the silence, and realize it doesn't frighten me anymore. A journalist once found me, young, ambitious, wanting to make a documentary about the man who tried to build heaven. I said, "You'll find better stories." She smiled, but none with an ending. I told her, "Then don't end it. Let the river keep flowing." She didn't understand. No one does, until they've lost the sound of applause. Sometimes I visit my mother's grave. I bring flowers, sit, and talk like a child. I tell her about the students, about the quiet sea, about how I no longer build walls, just bridges, small ones, wooden, temporary. I tell her the dam still stands, cracked but whole. I tell her I no longer hate it, because now I know it wasn't the dam that failed. It was the man who thought he could build heaven on other people's backs. And yet, in that failure, I found something close to grace. He still walks past bars at night. The music calls, softer now. He smiles, not to remember, but to forgive. The man who fell still lives inside him, but now they walk together. I used to measure life in megawatts. Now I measure it in moments of quiet. Peace begins where pleasure once ended. They say heaven is a place built on faith, but I think it's simpler. It's a place where the noise stops, where the river runs free, and a man finally stops trying to make the world in his image and learns to live in it. I built heaven once, and it broke me. Now I build smaller things. A chair that holds, a bridge that bends, a peace that doesn't need to last forever, just long enough to mean something. The river still flows, so do I.